Hi everyone, my name's Christy. I'm a digital literacies coordinator and I am indeed from the Gong. I've included some image of the beautiful Gong in my background so you can see what it's like up here. But I do wish a little bit that I was in Melbourne with you all because I love VALA. It's a great conference.
And I'm Karen Miller from Curtin University. I'm a learning coordinator here where I help develop learning programs. And yeah, I would love to be with you too, but this is the next best thing.
And I'm Kat, and I'm lucky enough to be in the room with you all today. I am the manager of digital literacy programs at Deakin Library, and I work very much in that learning and teaching, professional learning and learning experience kind of space. So, people and place are at the heart of creativity and collaboration. So we want to take a moment to ground ourselves in this concept. Today we gather together to share time and conversation, both in the physical and the digital. Now, VALA 2022 is taking place in Melbourne, but as we've discovered, my facilitators are across Australia. And the research and the paper that this talk is about is based in a community of practice that stretches across Australia and New Zealand for the academic library profession. And so with that in mind, we want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. We pause to recognise their living culture and unique role in this country, acknowledging their connections to land, sea and community. So we acknowledge
the Dharawal people, the Wurundjeri peoples of the Dharawal Nation.
I acknowledge the Whadjuk peoples of the Noongar Nation.
And I acknowledge the Waterfront people of the Kulin Nation, from whose lands we present to you from today. And we pay our respects to their leaders and elders, past, present and emerging. Now, we also extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and further than that, we'd like to respect the Maori peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, the conversation today is shaped around an opportunity for reflection and to involve yourself in the concepts that we discuss in this paper. So up here, we have a bit.ly link. If you have a device, please pull it out and please type that bit.ly link in. This is a shared space for this conversation. It is a live version of our presentation, and we encourage you to just sort of jump into the space and explore it with us today, and then afterwards you can go back and explore the elements that we don't touch on. And I'll hand over to Karen.
So what is the conversation that we're hoping to have today? Well, we wanted to explore concepts around creativity and collaboration within the library profession against the backdrop of a more specific focus on an active community of practice that crosses institutional boundaries. So we're hoping that it will be an opportunity for you to reflect on your understanding of creativity and how that creativity is expressed through collaborative activities that you might have experienced or are involved with currently. So it's about understanding the connections between you, creativity, and collaboration. And it's also about being aware of some of the universal themes that underpin the area of creativity. So we'll be unpacking some concepts around creativity. We'll be talking about the importance of social connectedness, trust, and willing participation to generate creative outcomes, the usefulness of conflict, as well as the role of technology in collaborative creativity. So the research comes out of our experience of working with the CAUL DigiDex Community of Practice. And this is a practitioner-led network with a core group of champions that represent every academic library across Australia and New Zealand. It's a really thriving community that work together to advocate and build digital dexterity across the higher education landscape. We wanted to give a shout out to CAUL, which has been hugely important in supporting the connections and the operations of this network. And there've been an amazing amount of tangible creative outputs from the group, and you can read more about it in the DigiDex blog if you're interested. We've got the link here. But what's been so wonderful about being involved in the group is watching our members shape its functioning, its connections, and the outcomes in a really self-directed way. So agency and autonomy have been really key to feeling engaged and building capacity. So we'll be sharing stories of creative library practice from within our network to really highlight the generative power of initiatives that nurture a sharing culture within a cross-boundary space. And I'm just going to hand over now to Christy.
Thanks, Karen. What we're going to do now is invite you to contribute your own perspectives, because we wanted this to be as much of a collaborative effort as our collaboration has been in writing the paper and our collaboration has been in the DigiDex community more broadly. So Karen's brought up the link on the Bitly presentation where you can find the Padlet. So that the Bitly link is just there and you'll be able to go out to the Padlet. And I want you to consider 2 questions. Now, when you're considering these questions, just say the first thing that comes into your mind. There really is no wrong or right answers when it comes to this. What I'd like to capture is your initial impressions of what these concepts mean to you. So the 2 questions that I'd like you to respond to are, how do you define creativity and how do you define collaboration? For anyone who's not used Padlet before, you'll see a plus sign or a pencil icon down in the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you'll be able to enter content into the Padlet, and you'll see that we've got this designated in 2 columns as well. So those first 2 columns are the only place you need to be writing at the moment. Now, one thing that's often a little bit uncomfortable in presentations is the idea of silence. So we're all sitting here, many of you gathered in the same physical space. Karen and I are joining from the digital space, and we're all sharing the digital space of this Padlet. So I'd like to invite everyone to just sit with that silence for a further minute and let some contributions come into this Padlet, and we'll take it from there.
Can you put the link up again for us?
This is the link directly to the Padlet. And for anyone who missed it, this is the link to the thing link, which has the Padlet. Sorry, I'll put it up again, but has the Padlet on this particular link. So the thing link. And I'll put up the Padlet link direct.
We've got around 10 seconds left for putting content in there, but please feel free to keep entering content as we present and as you think about these concepts and think about how they might relate to your own experience. I want to touch briefly on some of the themes that I'm already seeing coming through here. So thanks everyone for your generosity in putting your ideas into this Padlet so far. So when we look at how we define creativity, we've got things coming through like having fun, using imaginations, no stupid questions, which I love. Thank you to whoever wrote that. Someone stated that they believe creativity is part of us all and that it's actually a life-affirming aspect. And then when we look at collaboration, we've got things like knowledge sharing, sharing and learning with others, working with other people, having a common goal, lots of equal opportunity, diverse experiences, diverse knowledge. And someone has noted that it's hard work at times, but really worthwhile, which I think is an important perspective as well. We've also got things like some stakeholder or community identification, going back and forth and allowing others to fill in the gaps in your knowledge. These are all really important points when it comes to collaboration. So hold this in your mind, hold this as the starting point of where we're starting in our journey around creativity and collaboration. And we're going to move on from here to look at how that's been expressed in our own experience and what the literature is telling us about creativity and collaboration and how these things work as enabling factors for each other. We're also going to be looking at some enabling factors or some discussion points that you can reflect on throughout the session. So feel free to put some content into the Padlet as we're speaking, and this will be something we can draw on at the end of our presentation. And what I'd like you to explore are what the barriers may be to creativity or collaboration in your own context, what the enablers might be for stimulating that creativity or collaboration in your work, and where you might be able to recognize creativity emerging from your own collaborations. And on this final point, I do want to highlight something. Many people think of creative activity as something that is the purview of artists. purview of musicians, the purview of people who we consider as creative. We are all creative people. If you've got the capacity to look at something and think about how it might be done in a different way, think about how a different perspective might interact with your own, that's a creative activity. So don't feel that because you're not drawing something or painting something or making a piece of music that you're not creative. Group work can be collaborative. Ideas, bouncing ideas off each other, that's a creative process. So think about your own experience and think about how that creativity can be recognized emerging from your own collaborations. So I'm going to just pass you back to Karen to talk a little bit more about some of the broader perspectives around creativity.
Thanks, Christy. So yeah, in this part of the presentation, I'm going to take you down the rabbit holes a little way to briefly describe some of the key concepts that underpin the paper and that guided us on our journey of writing collaboratively together. So first, we wanted to define what we meant by creativity. So, you know, as Christy mentioned, there's some common misconceptions about creativity, that's about being artistic or that it's some special characteristic that's endowed on some people and not others. So we want to make it clear that creativity is a quality that's inherent in every person. It is a skill that can be learned and developed. And it's about creating original ideas, creating connections, seeing possibilities that solve problems and inspire others to create. Well, one of the writers that inspired us was Austin Kleon, the author of Steal Like an Artist. And he shows that although creativity is about bringing something new into the world, it always builds on previous ideas. Creativity is always a remix, and it's like an organic process where the new is arising out of the old, where creative work is always built on what went before. So the idea of creativity as a remix led us to the notion that creativity is always influenced and shaped by the environment. So the social, the historical milieu in which it's carried out. What we call creative is never the result of individual action alone. So having established that creativity cannot happen in isolation, we then looked at the idea of creativity emerging from collaboration, when people work together to create something new. And one of the concepts that resonated with us was the idea of the we paradigm. So the idea that creativity is embedded in social groups and that creative outcomes emerge from collaborative networks. So the last concept I want to touch on is the relationship between liminal space and creativity. So a liminal space is an in-between space. It's a threshold that separates one space from another. And in a liminal space, or a threshold state, as it can also be referred to, many of the usual limitations or restrictions that can stifle creativity are absent. Creativity can flourish and transformation can take place because these normal limits to thought, to self-understanding and behaviour are relaxed, and this opens the way to creativity. And our community of practice exists in a liminal space. It's at the boundary between our institutions. And we believe that the liminal nature of the group has created the space for us to collaborate and create together, really untethered by a lot of restraints. And we have found that to be really conducive to producing a lot of creative outcomes. So I hope that gives you a sense of where we're coming from in relation to concepts of creativity. And I'll now hand over to Kat.
So as you can pick up, we're arguing that creativity is an innate human characteristic, that it's part of our everyday, it's part of our routine behaviours. And a number of researchers, and I won't list them out, but they consider creativity in terms of the person, the product, the process, and the environment and place, as we've talked about. So whether it's a community of practice, a work team project, or another collaborative group, creativity and culture come together when we do create these physical and social environments that encourage experimentation, diverse perspectives, and iterative thought. These environments encourage the embracing of feedback and suggestions and are based in trust, respect, and empathy, as we heard in our last keynote. So with that in mind, the relational, the peopling, and culture are critical aspects to creativity. And this is why collaboration and open borders play such a critical role. Now, it's not surprising that in our consideration of why DigiDex has been such a generative and creative group, that we think 3 enabling elements are in play. Identity and culture of the group, a culture of openness, connection and sharing, and situated practice. Now, without going into too much depth, because the paper covers a lot of this, when we talk about identity and group culture, we're talking about the formation of shared understandings and identities, that this particular group that we're talking about sees themselves as innovators, as willing to give something a go, and the group has developed and is still developing shared purposes and drives, shared beliefs and principles, all of which is feeding their individual and group identity. And if we look at a culture of openness, connections and sharing, well, heck, libraries have been champions of open practice forever. This is our thing. We embrace the ethos of sharing, generosity and reciprocity. We also love some open education resources or open pedagogy. I can't tell you how many times I've heard those words in the last 6 months. So with all of that in the mix, we still need to acknowledge, though, that a core success ingredient for creative and collaborative groups is the emotional connections and the relationship building. And again, we say this requires trust, and it takes time, and it takes frequent interaction. And furthermore, members need to be genuinely interested and engaged and possess a sense of shared purpose and common identity. Now, situated practice is a core component of communities of practice. And it's when learning is necessarily situated in that way in a community. It's a process of participation, and newcomers join the communities via a process of what they call legitimate peripheral participation. So what we're saying is you can hang out in the edge of these kind of communities and you come in and out as you need. So without going into all the details of situated practice, because I could talk all day about that, I'm going to hand over to Christy to talk about a more interesting thing, which is generative conflict.
Thanks, Kat. So generative conflict is something that we don't often like to discuss. If you're anything like many of us, you try and avoid conflict where it comes up with sort of aiming for a nice harmonious existence. But when we come to think about creativity and about collaboration, conflict can be a really positive and generative force. So it's a cliche that life happens outside your comfort zone. We would argue that creativity also happens outside your comfort zone. That kind of melding of different perspectives leads to something that didn't exist in the first place. And if you read our paper, you'll note that there's a whole bunch of research that actually looked at how this process takes place and how that affects the final output. So if you're speaking to only like-minded people, you're going to come up with the same ideas you've always had. If you're speaking to a diverse range of perspectives, then that's going to give you the potential to create something new. One really key thing when you're thinking about conflict as a generative force is trust and respect. And this is something that has been noted already in the Padlet, so I know many of you are already thinking about this, but the ability to disagree, to put forward a different view in a way that's respectful and appreciative of others' views is one of the key things to making it a generative force rather than a destructive force. So embrace that conflict wherever it is, just make it done with a basis of trust and respect for each other's perspectives. One other thing that we have discovered with the DigiDex network in particular is the enabling effect of technology. So the DigiDex Champs network had formed prior to COVID. It formed before we were all doing all this sort of stuff online. So we had already built a strong relationship of meeting over Zoom, meeting over Teams, collaborating in a whole bunch of synchronous and asynchronous spaces. And when we explored how this was an affordance in our particular experience, we looked at how technology can either be an enabler or it can be an obstacle. And what the key to understanding the difference between those things is that it's more about the humans than the machine. So technology by itself is not enough. In higher education and in teaching and learning circles, we often talk about designing for pedagogy rather than technology. And the same thing applies here. You can put as many people as you want into a Zoom room, but if they don't show up with a willingness to participate, to interact with each other, to use that time that they've got together in that virtual space to create something or to interact, to have whatever the outcome is for that purpose of gathering, then it's not going to work. The technology doesn't do it for you. It's all about the people. And Technology is also never a one-size-fits-all situation. Some people, as we've explored in some of the other keynotes today, prefer to have their cameras off and just focus on the voices. Some people thrive with their cameras on and being able to see facial expressions and the, hand gestures of others. I personally am a hand gesturer, as you may be able to tell. So what we're looking for when we're thinking about creativity and collaboration is finding out the preferences of that group, using the technology that you have. It needs to be functional, but the functionality is not as important as the linkages that the humans create across those different digital spaces.
Now, to bring us home, I want to tell you about how we have a very glamour industry way of looking at things, like this discussion we're having today. And that is the question of what are the practical implications of this? So in short, there's been an immense amount of tangible outputs of this creative collaboration. Industry blogs that are very active, conference papers, presentations, workshops, governments, documents, and more recently, the Living Book of Digital Skills, which many of you have already heard about. However, what we want you to take away from today and what we've tried to highlight is not the tangible outcomes that you can go along and pick up and take back to your institutions, but rather the generative power of collaboration for individual and group creativity. That for creativity to emerge and collaboration to be a generative force, you need to build relationships and open practice.
And just to wrap up once more again, I just wanted, we wanted to be a little bit meta and mention our experience of writing the paper and preparing the presentation together, because it was so quintessentially a creative and collaborative process that was really powered by our friendship. I think writing papers with others can often be merely just cooperative, so everyone's writing their own bit and then you put it all together. But our experience was very different to that. We wrote the whole paper pretty much in real time together virtually while we were discussing the ideas, brainstorming. We would write different sections and then rewrite each other's sections. It really felt like we were engaged in a process that was continually in flux, that never really finished, and that's actually still ongoing. So to finish off, I'm going to hand over to Christy, who will take another look at the Padlet and to sum up where we're going with the comments and questions.
Thanks, Karen. And thank you to everyone who's been putting that input into the Padlet during our session. When we look at some of the things that you've written in there around the barriers and the enablers to collaboration and creativity, we're seeing some really key themes. So when we're looking at barriers, there's often talk about fear, whether that's fear of the individual or fear of the organisation from allowing that creativity or collaboration to be expressed. The lack of time is a barrier. People having closed minds or trying to work within rigid structures is something else that came through quite strongly. Having the wrong people involved or not involving the right people can also be a barrier. People need access to tools, and they also need to combat that fear of failure that can either be there at an institutional or at a personal level. And then when we look at the enablers, it flips all of that on its head. So we're looking at that freedom from micromanaging. So there's a real cultural shift when we're looking at the enablers. People are working within a safe environment, a safe culture where they actually feel free to fail. They feel that they're able to take all their knowledge, try things, mess it up a little bit, but know that they're supported to make the changes that they want to make. The tech affordances need to be there. Trust and relationships are incredibly important. But really what we're looking at is a lot of freedom and a lot of cultural freedom to do those collaborations and embrace creativity in that process.
And I've just realised that we've gone rogue with time.
I was just mindful of time. Thank you.
And do we need 5 minutes for questions? 4 minutes. We're good? Yeah.
Thank you so much. Caught us by surprise there for a second. Thank you very much. We do have some questions. This one's from Amy. How would you suggest we transform destructive creativity into generative creativity?
Ooh. Geez, I'll start with the hard ones. Gosh. Chrissy, I'm going to get you to answer this because we've talked about this before.
Sure. I think as we were talking about in the presentation, it really comes down to trust. open communication and being able to be respectful of the other person's perspective.
And I would add to that, when we talked about one of the enablers and barriers and things like that before, the destructive creativity is often coming out when the wrong people are in the group together. And it's okay to acknowledge that you're not working with the group that you should be with. And that would be what I would suggest, is perhaps change your group.
And can you suggest any exercises for kickstarting creative engagement?
Oh gosh, we have a raft of them actually.
I can.
You go first, roll them off, go.
One thing I would say is have a look online and look at design thinking. Design thinking is one of the best creative, open-minded collaboration practices you can engage in. There's a ton of free resources. And if you hit me up on Twitter, I'm happy to give you lots and lots of resources that will enable you to take that next step. That would be my number one.
And what I would suggest is embracing the rabbit warren, embracing those random walks, those shower thoughts. Creativity comes from unexpected places, and it's not always going to happen sitting at your desk or sitting in a project room. And so really embrace those moments when you're going out and it comes into your head, try and grab it and keep it for moving forward.
And allow for things to go sideways. When we were writing this paper, our conversations, they talk about your rabbit warren, like it meandered all over the place, but it ultimately made it richer. So allow for that, allow space for that.
Exposing yourself to as many different experiences and different, things is really good as well. Yeah, there's so many sort of tools and strategies for enhancing creativity. Yeah, activities, but things even like mindfulness is incredibly important as well.
And I've been trying to get going at Deakin for so long. I keep saying we should be doing a singing workshop, because this is a strange thing, but singing actually promotes creativity, but people are just not keen.
Okay, maybe just a quick last one. What's next for the group?
We've already dobbed ourselves in for this particular threesome to create a workshop later in the year. Do you guys want to talk about that?
It's extremely well formed as an idea. So
we'll bring some of these activities like how many funny faces can you draw in 20 circles? No. We only were just talking about it the other day. As we were discussing the paper, really, how we'd like to do that.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of workshops in our future.
And for the DigiDex community more broadly, they're in the midst of writing a chapter for IFLA. There is the ongoing living book of digital skills. They're constantly looking for people who would be interested in writing a blog piece about something that is impacting digital dexterity within your workplace. And there's just lots of different projects emerging.
Thank you so much. It's great to hear that there's things coming, and I really love how a lot of things at VALA intersect, and you sort of can pick out things that have been talked about in other presentations through, and that's really happened today. Thank you so much for this very sort of VALA 22 experience of in-person and online presentation. It's been a real treat. So thank you to Kat, to Karen and to Christy for coming along and joining us in this special way, and thank you very much for your presentation. I've got your pin over there.